It was a calm Sunday evening in Arlington, Mississippi, the kind of town where time seemed to slow down. The sun cast a golden glow across the quiet roads, but there was a simmering tension beneath the surface, a feeling that no one could shake off. Nathan Williams, a man in his 40s with a quiet, commanding presence, was driving home with his 8-year-old nephew, Malik. The two had spent the afternoon fishing at the nearby lake, an outing full of peaceful moments, but that peace was now slipping away. Nathan's face, weathered by years of discipline, betrayed nothing as he drove. He had left his life in the Marines behind, opting for the calm of family life, but it seemed that peace was never truly his to keep. Malik sat in the back, excited, holding up a small fish he'd caught, his voice bubbling with pride. Nathan glanced in the rearview mirror, offering a warm, steady smile. The road was almost empty, save for the occasional pickup truck. It was a simple, quiet moment, and Nathan felt a quiet contentment until the flashing red and blue lights cut through the calm. Nathan's stomach tightened, not from fear, but because he knew exactly what those lights often meant in this town. The road, once serene, now felt suffocating. He guided the car to the side, a quiet instruction to Malik: stay calm. Keep quiet. The police cruiser pulled up behind them, its engine humming like a predator stalking its prey. Two officers stepped out, one tall and wiry, the other stocky with an air of arrogance. They didn't need to say a word, just their presence was enough to unsettle Nathan. License and registration, the stocky officer barked, his voice thick with hostility. Nathan's movements were deliberate as he reached for his wallet. His fingers were steady, the act of handing over his ID and the car's paperwork practiced. It was routine, nothing more, at least, it should have been. "You in a hurry or something?" the wiry officer asked, his voice colder, circling the car like a shark. "No, sir. Just heading home," Nathan replied, his voice even, as calm as the wind before a storm. The stocky officer squinted at Nathan's ID, his lips curling into a sneer. "Nathan Williams, huh? You sure you belong around here?" Nathan's gaze remained unbroken, his silence a shield. He didn't rise to the provocation, instead, he locked eyes with the officer, his expression neutral, unwavering. But the officer's shared glance told a different story. This wasn't just a routine stop. Something was off. The stocky officer handed Nathan's ID to his partner, who retreated to the cruiser to run a check. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the soft hum of the police radio. In the back seat, Malik fidgeted, his small hands gripping the edge of the seat. "Uncle Nathan, are we in trouble?" Malik whispered, his voice small and fragile. Nathan's response was calm, his voice a soft anchor. "No, Malik. Just stay quiet, okay?" His eyes briefly flicked to the rearview mirror, meeting Malik's gaze. There was no panic in Nathan's voice, only a quiet resolve. The wiry officer's eyes darted from Nathan to the boy, his lips curling into a grin. "Got yourself a little passenger, huh? Where are you coming from?" "Fishing," Nathan answered plainly. The officer circled the car, his voice probing, searching for something. "You sure you're not hiding anything?" Nathan said nothing, knowing better than to volunteer any more information. The stocky officer handed Nathan's ID back to the wiry one, who muttered, "Nothing on him. Guess we're just full of surprises today." The stocky officer's eyes narrowed as he leaned closer to Nathan's window. "Thing is, your brake light's out. You know that?" Nathan frowned but remained composed. "It was working fine earlier." "Are you sure?" The officer's smirk widened, and he leaned in further, his voice lowering. "Are you questioning me?" Nathan met his gaze unflinchingly. "Not at all, sir. Just saying it was working when I checked." The officer straightened, his posture stiff, then tapped the roof of the car. "Step out of the vehicle." Nathan's jaw tightened, but he complied, opening the door slowly. The gravel crunched under his boots as he stepped onto the roadside. He didn't want to escalate things, not with Malik in the car. He could feel the shift in the air, the officer's intent wasn't to simply ticket him. They were looking for something more. The stocky officer's gaze lingered on Malik, a smug glint in his eyes. "Cute kid," he remarked, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. Shame if he had to see something unpleasant. Nathan's hands instinctively curled into fists, but he quickly unclenched them, his voice a controlled whisper. "There's no need to involve him in this." "Oh, we'll decide what needs to happen here," the wiry officer snapped, his voice laced with venom as he circled around to the passenger side. He opened the door with force, startling Malik. "Step out, kid," he commanded. "No," Nathan said sharply, his voice a clear barrier between his nephew and the officers. He stepped forward, his body a protective shield. "He stays in the car." For a moment, the two officers exchanged a look, their arrogance faltering. Nathan's calm authority had caught them off guard. They were used to men who panicked, who shrunk under the weight of their power. But Nathan didn't flinch. He stood tall, unyielding. But the officers weren't backing down. They were just getting started. The wiry officer slammed the passenger door shut with a loud thud, the sound echoing in the stillness of the evening. He glared at Malik, who recoiled into the back seat, clutching his fishing rod like it was a lifeline. The stocky officer stepped closer to Nathan, his arms crossed, his body a wall of intimidation. "You got a problem following orders, Mr. Williams? Or maybe you think you're smarter than us?" Nathan didn't flinch. He stood his ground, his hands relaxed by his sides, his voice calm but unyielding. "I don't want any trouble. I just want to get my nephew home." The stocky officer's chuckle was dark, full of malice. "Trouble? Oh, you're making it real clear you don't understand who's in charge here." Nathan's mind raced. He could feel the weight of Malik's wide eyes, the boy's innocent gaze reflecting fear. This wasn't just about Nathan anymore. This was about teaching Malik what strength truly meant, what it looked like when you stood firm, even when the world was against you. The wiry officer's voice broke the silence. "Let me make it easy for you." He moved closer, his tone mockingly sweet. "Step back over to your car. Hands on the hood. Let's see if you've got anything you shouldn't." Nathan's eyes narrowed slightly, but he complied, placing his hands flat against the sun-warmed surface of the car. His training kicked in, control the situation. Assess every variable. Stay one step ahead. The pat-down was more invasive than necessary. The wiry officer grinned, making a show of pulling out Nathan's phone, his wallet, and tossing them carelessly onto the hood. "You're awful quiet," the stocky officer said, his voice low, almost a growl. "That's not guilt I'm smelling, is it?" Nathan didn't respond. He had learned long ago that silence could speak louder than any words. But then the wiry officer crossed a line. He opened the back door, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Step out, kid." Malik hesitated, his small body trembling. His wide eyes flicked between his uncle and the officer. He was scared, caught in the middle of a storm he couldn't understand. "Leave him alone," Nathan said, his voice sharp like a blade. His body tensed as he straightened up, his stature towering over the officers. "Step away from him." The wiry officer sneered, stepping closer. "What's the matter, tough guy? You gonna show us your marine tricks?" Nathan's gaze never wavered. He didn't need to answer. Nathan moved without hesitation, positioning himself firmly between Malik and the officers. His steps were measured, slow, each one purposeful, designed to create distance without retreating. The air between them grew taut, thick with the weight of unspoken words. "Malik, stay in the car," Nathan's voice rang out, steady and commanding, as he kept his gaze locked on the officers. Malik's small hands gripped the edge of his seat as he nodded reluctantly, pulling the door closed behind him. The stocky officer's hand drifted toward his holster, his voice sharp, dangerous. "You're real close to resisting, Marine. You want to see how far we'll take this?" Nathan's eyes never wavered. His expression was unreadable, yet something about his stillness held more power than any words could. He tilted his head slightly. "You've already gone far enough. A heavy silence followed, thick, suffocating. The kind of silence that makes even the boldest second-guess their next move. The wiry officer shifted nervously, glancing toward his partner as if seeking a sign, something to justify the tension thickening in the air. Without warning, Nathan acted, a swift movement so controlled, so precise, that it seemed almost effortless. He reached forward, plucking the stocky officer's wallet from his hand and tossing it lightly onto the hood of the car. It wasn't an aggressive gesture, but it was clear, he wasn't playing their game anymore. "Let me be clear," Nathan said, his voice calm, unwavering. "I'm not going to fight you. I'm not going to argue. But I will not let you intimidate a child to prove your authority." The stocky officer's face turned crimson, his composure cracking. "You don't give the orders here," he snapped, stepping closer. Nathan's stillness was like a wall, unwavering. His gaze bore into the officer with quiet intensity, unyielding. "You're right," Nathan said, his voice low but firm, "I don't give orders. But I also don't take them from men who abuse their badges." The wiry officer lunged, a frantic, sloppy motion. Driven by frustration rather than training, his hands reached for Nathan's arm, but Nathan was faster, sidestepping with effortless ease, leaving the officer stumbling into nothingness. Nathan didn't push him. He didn't strike. He simply moved, just enough to keep control. The stocky officer pulled out his radio, his voice low and sharp. "Back up." Nathan didn't flinch. He stood tall, his presence alone commanding attention. The situation was escalating, but Nathan knew, these next moments would decide everything. And then, as if to add a final twist, Malik did something that neither Nathan nor the officers had anticipated. Inside the car, his trembling fingers reached for Nathan's phone, which had been tossed carelessly onto the hood earlier. With shaking hands, he unlocked it. Nathan had shown him how, in case of emergencies, and pressed the record button. Through the cracked window, the phone captured everything. "Malik," Nathan whispered softly, a warning in his voice, but it was too late. The wiry officer had already spotted the movement. "What's that kid doing?" he barked, his tone thick with a hint of panic. Nathan moved swiftly, stepping into the officer's path. His broad shoulders blocked the man's approach. "He's doing what you're afraid of," Nathan said, his voice cool and measured, making sure the truth comes out. The stocky officer's hand twitched near his holster, his bravado faltering, crumbling under the weight of the unfolding reality. "You think you're smart, huh? Think you can outsmart the system?" Nathan's lips barely parted, a faint curve of confidence. "I don't have to outsmart the system," he said evenly, "I just have to let the system see you for who you really are." Frustration, anger, and embarrassment twisted the wiry officer's face as he lunged again. His movements were clumsy, fueled by desperation. Nathan sidestepped once more, this time grabbing the officer's wrist with a firm but controlled grip. He didn't twist or yank, he simply held the officer in place. His voice was calm, unwavering. "You don't want to do this." The officer froze, his face contorted with humiliation, the fight draining from him. Nathan let go, his movement deliberate, his control unwavering. "You've already lost control," he said softly, "don't make it worse." Meanwhile, Malik's phone continued to capture every moment. The stocky officer's voice crackled through the radio again, but this time it was less authoritative, more frantic. His eyes flicked nervously between Nathan and the approaching sirens. The sound of those distant lights was the only noise that could be heard now, a quiet countdown to what would happen next. Nathan took a step back, his hands raised slightly, the calm before the storm. "This can end right here. No one has to get hurt. But if you keep pushing, you're going to find out that the power you think you have doesn't go as far as you believe." The stocky officer's face flushed with fury, his chest rising and falling with labored breaths. He struggled to maintain his grip on authority, but the wiry officer muttered something under his breath. "This is gonna get us fired." Nathan's eyes caught the words, his expression softening just slightly. "It's not too late to do the right thing," he said. "You can walk away from this." But the question wasn't whether Nathan could stand his ground. It was whether these officers would make the right choice or dig themselves even deeper. Then, the distant wail of sirens pierced the air. The stocky officer's hand twitched again, reaching for his holster, but the wiry cop's eyes darted between Nathan and the approaching lights. Their confidence was unraveling before their eyes. The power they had so arrogantly wielded was slipping away, piece by piece. Nathan didn't move. He simply stood, his expression calm but unwavering. As the first patrol car pulled up, lights flashing, two younger officers stepped out. They were different. No swagger. No barked orders. They were cautious. One of them, a black officer, spoke first, his voice steady. "What's going on here?" he asked, his gaze shifting between Nathan and the two officers who had called for backup. The stocky officer stepped forward, trying to explain, but his voice cracked. "We had a situation. This man was resisting." Nathan cut him off, his tone clear, calm, commanding. "Or recording." The younger officer looked at Malik, who held the phone up, still recording. "Do you have footage of what happened?" the officer asked. Nathan nodded toward Malik. "My nephew does. He's been recording since they started targeting him." The wiry officer's face drained of color. He muttered under his breath, "This is gonna ruin us." The younger officers exchanged a look, and the black officer's jaw tightened. He turned to Nathan. "Sir, are you okay? Is the boy okay?" "We're fine," Nathan replied, his voice steady. "But this isn't the first time these two have pulled something like this, is it?" The question hung in the air, heavy, filled with implication. The younger officers didn't answer, but the truth was clear in their eyes. This wasn't an isolated incident. Malik handed over the phone. The black officer reviewed the footage, his expression darkening with each passing moment. When he looked up, there was no hesitation. "You two, turn in your badges now." The stocky officer's mouth opened to protest, but the wiry cop shook his head, his defeat evident. "Just do it," he muttered. The scene unfolded quickly from there. The corrupt officers were placed in handcuffs, their protests drowned out by the sound of sirens and the whispers of bystanders who had begun to gather. Nathan stood quietly, his arm around Malik, watching as the flawed system took its first steps toward accountability. When the chaos subsided, the black officer approached Nathan. "I'm sorry this happened to you," he said quietly. "It shouldn't have." Nathan met his gaze. "It happens too often," he said softly. "But it doesn't have to keep happening." The officer nodded solemnly. "We'll make sure the footage gets where it needs to go." With that, Nathan and Malik were finally free to go. But the events of that evening would echo far beyond that quiet road in Mississippi. As they drove home, the silence between them was broken by Malik's small voice. "Uncle Nathan, are you mad?" Nathan glanced in the rearview mirror. His voice was soft but firm. "No, Malik. I'm proud. You did the right thing today." The boy's small smile was enough to light up the dark road ahead. This wasn't just a lesson for Malik. It was a lesson for anyone watching. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's quiet and steady, standing up for what's right, even when the world seems stacked against you.